Hey there, how's it going, everybody? So there are a lot of system administration videos that I'd like to do in the near future on topics like Ansible and setting up web servers and running a Jenkins server and things like that. And in order to do that, I'd like to have some virtual machines set up that we can have SSH access to. So in a previous video, we already saw how to create snapshots of certain machine states. And in this video, we'll be learning how to clone virtual machines, add these machines to a network so that they can communicate with each other, and make sure that they have internet access, and also set up SSH so that we're able to SSH into these machines from our host machine. So this will allow us to pretty much build an entire virtual lab that we can use to test all kinds of different stuff. So after we're done, this will give us the ability to quickly spin up a new virtual machine that behaves just like a real machine on our network. So if you do want to follow along with those future videos and don't currently have a machine that you can run experiments on, then you should probably follow along with this video so that you have a virtual machine that you can SSH into. And we'll be using VirtualBox for this video. And in a few previous videos, we looked at how to install a couple of different operating systems in VirtualBox. So we learned how to install Ubuntu Desktop and Kali Linux. So if you'd like to see how I got these machines installed, then you can go back and watch either of those videos. And I'll put a link to that in the description section below. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and create two clones of this Ubuntu machine and get them set up to where we can SSH into them from our host machine. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, I'd like to point out that the virtual machines that we've created so far are pretty fresh installations. So the only thing that we've done is install the operating system and some guest additions. Now, I also went in and added some code to the bashrc files and made the text a little larger so that you could see, but other than that, it should be just about the same. So those changes aren't going to affect if you're following along, but if you notice that my prompt looks different than yours when you log into these machines, then that's the reason. And after you do get those machines set up how you like, I usually like to create a snapshot of that machine so that you can go back to the fresh install or any place else if anything gets changed by mistake. And like I said, if you would like to learn more about how to do snapshots, then I do have a video on specifically just that, and I'll put a link to that video in the description section also. And personally, one thing that I also like to do is after I get all my operating systems set up, then I like to rename these to base at the beginning here so that I know that these are machines that I want to clone from. So now that I have these set up to where I want to clone from these machines, I'm not going to change anything on these machines anymore, and then I'll just work with the clones. So let's go ahead and do that now and get started on creating our machines that we're going to be able to SSH into. So to start, let's check out our VirtualBox preferences. So we want to go up here to VirtualBox and hit Preferences. And from here, let's go to Network. And now let's choose Host Only Network. And we want to be sure that we have a host-only network in here. So you can see that I have one, you might have two, but you want to be sure that you at least have one. And if you need to create one, then you can click this Add button over here. So now I'm going to double click on this VBox Net 0 and look at its settings. So you can see that we have an IPv4 address of 192.168.56.1, and we're going to need to remember that IP for later. And our subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. And if we click on the DHCP server settings here, then I'm just going to leave this unchecked because we're going to be assigning static IPs to our machines. And once we're sure that we have that host-only network, then we need to change the network settings for our base machine. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I'll close out of this, and then for our base machine, I'm going to select the base machine and then open up its settings. Now let's go over here to Network, and within Network, we're going to go to Adapter 1, which should be the default, and we're going to have this set to NAT, N-A-T, and this will allow our guests to connect to the internet through our host connection. And now let's go over here to Adapter 2, and let's enable this network adapter also. And for this adapter, we're going to choose this drop down here, and let's choose host only adapter. Now, just a quick side note, if you want to view these different network options on the VirtualBox page, they have a good rundown of what each of these options mean, and I'll leave a link to that in the description section below. I have it pulled up right here. It's just this website here, and I'll leave a link to this, but they have what all of these different network possibilities are. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this again. Be sure that we have host only adapter selected there. And once we select host only, you also want to make sure that it's set to the specific network that we just made sure existed. Okay, so now that we have our different base Linux systems set up how we'd like, let's look at how fast we can get up and running with creating multiple clones that we can SSH into. So now to clone that machine, I'm just going to right click on our machine and hit clone. You can see we could also use Command O. And within here, I'm going to rename this to this first clone here. I'm just going to name Ubuntu-1. And we do want to reinitialize the MAC address of the network card. So let's go ahead and continue. And we'll do a full clone for this one. And we will do the current machine state. And once that clone is finished, I'm going to go ahead and create a second clone here. And I'm going to call this one Ubuntu 2. And we'll reinitialize the MAC address and continue and full clone, and current machine state is fine. Okay, so once both of those are created, let's go ahead and start up both of those machines and log into each one. So I'll just grab Ubuntu 2 and put it on the right side of my screen, and Ubuntu 1 I will put on the left side of my screen. Now, since we cloned these from a machine that already had guest editions installed, we already have guest editions installed for these clones as well. So that's the benefit of cloning a machine that's already been set up. So now I'll log into both of these machines, and then as soon as I log in here, I'm going to open up Terminal. So I'll open up Terminal on Ubuntu 1 here, and also on Ubuntu 2. So first, let's make sure that we can access the internet on both of our machines. And to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and ping google.com. And I'll do that on the second machine here as well. So you can see that we are pinging google.com, so it does have network access. And the reason it has that access is because we're using that NAT as our first adapter, and that gives us internet access through our host machine. So now let's set up the host names of both of our machines. So I have my prompt set up to display the host name here in the prompt, and you can see that currently these are both the same because it has the same host name as our base machines, since that's what we cloned from. So to do this, to change these host names, we're going to have to edit two different files. And you can use Vim to edit these files, but if you're unfamiliar with Vim, then you may want to use an editor like Nano. So let's edit this file. So we're going to do sudo nano, and the first file that we want to edit is under etc/hostname. And we'll open that up and put in our credentials here. And for the first machine, we will just call this Ubuntu-1. And we'll also do this over here on the second machine. So we'll do sudo nano/etc/hostname and put in our credentials. And we will call this one Ubuntu-2. And in Nano, to save this, you hit Control X and then Y to save. And over here, we'll hit Control X and then Y to save. And now another file to change that host name, we need to open up our host file. So /etc/hosts. And right here on the first line where we had the old host name, I'm just going to erase that. And this one was called Ubuntu-1. So we will save that. And then over here on this machine, we'll do the same thing. Sudo nano, that's -etc/host. And on the second line here, we're going to erase the old host name. And the new one for this machine was Ubuntu-2. So Control X, Y to save. Okay, so now that we have that done, let's run a command ifconfig and -a. And we'll do that on this machine as well. ifconfig-a. Oh, looks like I missed a space there. So ifconfig space -a. Okay, so now we should be able to see our network interfaces. Now this first one here with the inet address is bound to our first adapter, and we're going to bind this second one here to an IP address on our host-only network that we specified before. So keep the name of this second interface in mind here because it may be different than what is on my machine. So for you, this may be something like ETH1 or something like that. So be sure that you keep in mind the second adapter name here. So mine is ENP0S8. So I'm going to remember that. And while remembering that, now I'm going to change one more file here to change our network interfaces. So this file is going to be sudo nano, and the file is /etc/network/interfaces. And we'll open this up in our second machine here as well. So that's /etc/network/interfaces. And within this file, I'm going to come down here to the bottom. I'll do it on my first machine first. And this is going to be kind of a long here, but just bear with me. So we're going to say auto, and then the name of that interface, and mine was ENP0S8. Then on the next line, we're going to do iFace, and then the name of that interface again. Now we're going to tell this that we want it to be a static IP address. So that's inet static. And now we want to specify what this address is. So we'll say address, and I'm going to set the address for this machine to 192.168.56.100. And now this 192.168.56, remember that was the first part of our host-only adapter address. Okay, and with that said, let's also do our subnet mask. So we'll do net mask, and we're going to set this to 255.255.255.0. Okay, and now we're going to have to do the same thing on our second machine here. So I'll go ahead and speed this up so that you don't have to watch me type all this again. Okay, so once we get to this point on our second machine, now we want to be sure that we choose a different static IP address for each of these machines because we have to know which machine that we're going to be SSHing into. So for this one, instead of 192.168.56.100, let's do 101. And now the subnet mask is going to be the same. So we'll do a net mask of 255.255.255.0. And you'll want to check your typing at this point because it's easy to make typos whenever you're typing all this stuff out. So let's go ahead and save both of these. So Control X and Y, Control X, and yes to save. Okay, so now once we've made it to that point, I'm going to go ahead and reboot my machine. So I'm going to do a sudo reboot, and we'll do this on the second machine as well, sudo reboot. Now, I think we could have activated those changes without a reboot, but since it doesn't take too long, I just like to go ahead and reboot at that point just in case. Okay, so once our reboot is complete, let's go ahead and log back into each of our machines. And once we're logged into each of our machines, let's pull back up the terminal and we'll run a couple of checks here. Okay, so first of all, we can see that it has the new host name for each machine. So this is now Ubuntu 1, and this is now Ubuntu 2. So now if we rerun the ifconfig command, ifconfig-a, and over here we'll do ifconfig-a. Now if we look at our second adapter here, we can see that now it has an IP address that we set in our network interfaces file. And over here, let's do that same check. So we have our second adapter here, and we have a static IP address that's set to the IP address that we specified in that file. So now that we have these machines set up on the same network, they should be able to communicate with each other. And we can test this by pinging their IP addresses. So from the first machine, we can say, I want to ping that 192.168.56.101 because that's our second machine is 101. So if I run that, you can see that we're getting some ping responses back. And from the second machine, we can try to ping the first machine. So we can say ping 192.168.56.100, and that's our first machine. So if we run that, we can see that we're getting a ping response back from that as well. So now I'll go ahead and kill those and clear our screens. Okay, so that's nice that those machines can talk to each other, but also, the good thing about this is that if we open up a terminal on our host machine, then we should also be able to hit both of those guest machines from our host machine as well. So to try this, we can do a ping 192.168.56.100 for our first machine. And we can see that we're getting a response back from that. And if I do a ping on the second machine, then we can see that we're getting a response back from that as well. So I'll go ahead and clear that out. Okay, so we can ping those machines, but now let's try to SSH into those machines. So instead of a ping command here, I'm going to do an SSH and then the user that we want to SSH as, so Corey MS at the IP address. So we're going to try to log in to, and I'll try to log into the first machine here. So I'll make that a 100. So we're trying to SSH as Corey MS on this machine. So if I run this, Now at this point that may have worked for you and it may not have. So it didn't work for me. So if it doesn't work for you, then you might not have OpenSSH installed. So if it doesn't work for you, then we'll need to go to our virtual machine and install your SSH server. So to do this, let's go to each of our machines here, and we're just going to do a sudo apt-get update and type in our credentials here, and we'll do that on this machine as well. And type in our credentials. And that just updates our packages list. So now I'll clear those out. And now we want to install OpenSSH server. So to do this, we will do sudo apt-get install. And this is OpenSSH, all one word, with a dash and then server. And then it'll ask you to continue. Again, you can just hit yes there. And we'll do the same thing on our second machine. So sudo apt-get install OpenSSH and then dash server, and then it'll ask us to continue and we'll hit yes. Now I should also point out that those commands may be different depending on which version of Linux that you're using. So now I'm going to clear our screens here. Now if you already had OpenSSH server installed and it still wasn't working, then one thing that you can try is just restarting that service. And to do that, you can restart the service by saying sudo service SSH restart, and we'll do that over here as well. So sudo service SSH restart. So now if those changes work correctly, then we should be able to SSH into our machine now from our host machine. So let's go ahead and try that. So that same command that failed a little bit ago, if we try this again. So now we've got a little further. It's asking us if we want to continue connecting, and we'll type yes. And then for the passphrase, I'm just going to leave that blank and hit enter. And now it's asking us for our password. So we'll put in our password. And now we can see here that from our host machine, we are on the Ubuntu 1 machine. So the SSH was successful. So if I do an ls, then this is the home directory of my virtual machine. If I do a uname-a, then we can see that it says that it's Linux Ubuntu, so we actually are SSH'd into that machine. So let's try to do the same thing with our second machine. So instead of 100 there as the one that we're SSHing into, let's do 101 if I hit enter. Okay, so at this point that may have worked for you, but I also wanted to show you what this looked like as well. So if you have been messing around with a few different machines and trying this with a few different machines, then it may get to the point where you need to remove your keys belonging to a host name from a known host file, because that's what this error is here. So basically with that first machine, when we typed in yes, it added information to that known host file. And if you do this with multiple machines, then that can get confusing. So to do this and to remove that key from the known host file, all we have to do is do SSH-keygen and then a -R option, and then the IP address. And the IP address for this is 192.168.56.101. And if we hit enter there, we can see that it found that old key on line 7 and updated the file. So now let's try, and I'll clear my screen here now. So now let's try to SSH into that second machine again. So now it says that it didn't find it, and if we want to continue connecting, and we'll type yes. And then again for the passphrase, we'll just leave that blank. And now it's asking for our password. Okay, so now we can see that we're SSH'd into that Ubuntu machine, that second Ubuntu machine. Okay, so once I get the machines to this point where I can log in via SSH, I usually like to create a snapshot of that virtual machine at this point so that I can revert back to that state if I ever mess anything up by experimenting, because that's what we want to do with these machines, is experiment with different softwares. So I will go ahead and create 2 snapshots. So on Ubuntu 1 here, I'll go in and create a snapshot. And for the snapshot description, I'm just going to say SSH setup. And in the snapshot description, I usually like to add the static IP address just in case I forget in the future. I can look in the description. So I'm just going to say 192.168.56.100 for that one. And I will copy that for the next one. And for Ubuntu 2 machine, I'll take a snapshot. And again, I will just, for the name, I'll do SSH setup, and down here, I will paste in the IP address, and that was 101, and hit OK there. Oh, and actually, I just realized that I made a mistake when creating these snapshots. If you have watched my snapshot video, then you'll remember that you don't want to take snapshots of running machines unless you need to, because it'll save the exact state of that machine, and it takes up way more space. So I'm going to shut down these machines first and then create a snapshot. And I'll go ahead and skip forward here so that you don't have to see this entire process. Okay, and with those snapshots created, now I'm going to power these machines back up so that we can SSH back into them one last time. Okay, and lastly, let's set this up so that we can SSH into these machines by their host name. So currently, if I was to say SSH as Corey MS at Ubuntu 1 for our first machine and hit enter, then it says that it doesn't know that host name. So even though we can SSH into that machine using the IP address, it would be nice if we could SSH into it using the host name as well. So to get this working, we're going to have to update our host file on our host machine so that it knows that that host name is associated with that IP address. And I'll just use nano again. So I'll do sudo nano, and this host file is in /etc/hosts, and we'll need to put in our password. Okay, and at the bottom of this file, I'm going to go down to the very bottom here, and first we're going to put in the IP address. So we'll put in 192.168.56.100, and then we'll have a space. Actually, instead, I will do a tab, and now we want the host name associated with that IP address. So I'll do Ubuntu-1, and now let's do that same thing for the second one here. So 192.168.56.101 tab, and this one is Ubuntu 2, and we'll hit Control X and Y to save that. Okay, so now let's clear our screen and try that again. So I'll try to SSH in as Ubuntu-1, and we will add that to our host file. No passphrase. Now it's asking for our password. Okay, and we can see that we're in there. And just to double check, let's exit out of that machine and let's try to SSH into Ubuntu 2. So we'll type in yes there, no passphrase, type in our password, and we can see that we can SSH into both of those using the host name. Okay, so I think that is going to do it for this video. Now, I know that that seems like a lot to set up these machines that can communicate with each other and that we can SSH into, but really the process isn't that long from start to finish if you do it a few times. And like I was saying before, this is going to allow us to test a lot of different things in a sandbox environment that we can just scrap and recreate if we mess anything up. Now, one thing that I wanted to mention is that there are a lot of different ways that I've seen other people set this up, and this is just my preferred method for several reasons that I'm not going to go into here. Now, there are ways to do this similar thing using port forwarding or bridged network connections or using Docker, but those have all slightly different behaviors, and for my testing needs, this method has worked well. Okay, so now that we have some fresh machines set up that we can SSH into, maybe I'll try to put together some tutorials on tools like Ansible where we can automate the provisioning of multiple machines, or we can do something like Jenkins where we can walk through how to get started with continuous integration or anything like that. But if you have any questions about what we covered in this video, then feel free to ask in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer those. And if you enjoy these tutorials and would like to support them, then there are several ways you can do that. The easiest way is to simply like the video and give it a thumbs up. And also, it's a huge help to share these videos with anyone who you think would find them useful. And if you have the means, you can contribute through Patreon, and there's a link to that page in the description section below. Be sure to subscribe for future videos, and thank you all for watching.